And so this is going to be a response to a comment I received on one of my videos by a guy called Harvomail. And Harvomail asked me a question. The video I put up, funnily enough, was one about people living on unemployment benefits, but the question I got was very different to that. He tells me that he is mixed race. He's something like 40% Native American, and I'm guessing 60% European. He says he looks European, and he's about 6'1", and he has pale skin. He wants to know, do I view him less? Well, obviously, I don't view any one person belonging to any group as less, but it's a legitimate question, and I think it's worth answering. So I think the best way for me to answer this is, it can be structured into two parts. First of all, what are my views on race mixing in general? And second, what are my views on people who are mixed race? Like, what sort of advice would I get? What would I say about those people? So first of all, what are my views on race mixing in principle? Well, in general, I don't really encourage it. Because, all right, even as somebody who, who has tried and failed many times to get with the opposite sex, the views I take about how men and women should be in relation to one another from a sociological perspective, I have strong views on race mixing. I don't think it's a responsible thing to do because it creates problems in the long term that can be avoided if you don't do it. So, for instance, there's a difference between being with somebody of a different ethnicity. Now, ethnicity is a lot more vague and broad, and there are less visual differences between people of different races. Say you of different ethnicities. Say you take a look at the average Irish person, the average Scot, and the average English person. It would be virtually impossible to tell one apart from the other. Likewise with the average German, the average Pole, the average Frenchman, from the average British. However, race is an entirely different matter. Race is something that transcends ethnicity. That it is, there are biological bases in race. You know, our society is in widespread denial about the reality of race. I should make this I should talk about this more in a different video. But race is something. Race is transnational. There are lots of, broadly speaking, I think there are 4 different racial categories. There may be more. Caucasoid, Negroid, Mongoloid, and I think Native American or Indian. But anyway, well, last time I checked, those were the 4 main groups. Now, you know, the diversity of different humans that exist is, on the one hand, it's beautiful and it should be respected. You know, we should respect the fact that there are different population groups who have evolved to different climates and different continents over time. And those different groups have formed their own different civilizations. They have a different interpretation in terms of what life is about. They have different songs and different cultural traditions and so on. But is it a good idea for somebody from one race to mix with another? Well, I don't believe it is, and this is why. First of all, you're going to, if you race mix with somebody, you're going to have a child who will be confused about their upbringing. I say, for instance, you have a white father and a black mother, or a black father and a white mother, and this is in a predominantly white country like England. Well, that child is going to grow up, first of all, with a noticeably different complexion compared to most other people of his age group. He's going to go to school where predominantly all of the other kids look a certain way, but he looks different. And people are going to be puzzled by this because children especially are too young to understand what race is. And if you've never seen somebody of a different race before, especially as a young child, well, the differences can be quite jarring. This child, he might look at himself in the mirror and think, why do I have such kinky, wavy hair? And why does everybody else's hair look so different to mine? Why do I have dark brown eyes and everybody else has blue, green, or brown eyes, etc.? Why is my skin different? Why does my nose look different to the rest of everybody else? And people will ask that child, where are you from? Even though the child, to the best of his knowledge, believes that he was born in that country, in terms of his roots, his ancestry, he actually spiritually, he's from an entirely different place altogether. So now, speaking as somebody who feels, on some level, I feel a measure of alienation, although not to the same degree that people who are of mixed roots do. Now, I've struggled to make friendships with people within my peer group, and I think about how much more difficult this would be if, on another level, in terms of race, how different I would be, and this would just add another layer of loneliness and alienation from other people that I certainly could do without. So that's the first thing that you got to consider when you race mix. Just because you choose not to see race doesn't mean race doesn't see you, because race is real whether you like it or not. And also more relevantly, even if you come to terms with the fact that your child may possibly never be accepted by people of either groups, there's the more relevant matter of what do you do if your mixed race child needs a blood transfusion or a kidney transplant. See, the problem is, if you need a kidney transplant or an organ donation, then that organ needs to be from somebody who is racially identical to yourself, because our bodies are different, and your body will reject an organ if it's too different. So that's another thing to consider, because these things do matter. This is what our media, this is what our politicians, our government, this is what we never hear from those other people. And speaking of which, our government, our state media and all that, there's this sick fetish and this weird obsession that our media has with portraying mixed race couples like it's the norm, or even like it's desirable. I don't know if you guys have ever watched TV, but if you've ever taken the time to look at the average ad break, those John Lewis or Tesco adverts, especially around Christmas time, I mean, you'll be blown away by the number of mixed race couples that you will see. It's always, you'll see either a black woman and a white husband, or a black husband, a black father and a white woman, and all their children are mixed race. You would see this so often if everything you knew about Britain was based on what you observed on television. You'd be forgiven for thinking that everyone in the UK was mixed race, because this is how our media portrays it. But the reality is very different. You see, as people, we are more or less genetically inclined to live and associate with people who look more similar to ourselves. This is an observed reality of nature. This is what the Canadian scientist J. Philippe Rushton talks about in his genetic similarity theory. See, in principle, it's quite simple. We have a tendency to live and associate with people who are more genetically similar to ourselves. And this genetic similarity theory, it filters down into more or less every single interaction we have with other people in terms of what we look for in a partner. Because studies have shown that we're more attracted to women, and likewise women are more attracted to men who are more genetically similar to each other. And also in terms of our friend groups, we tend to get along better with and we're more likely to be friends with people who are more genetically similar to ourselves. This is something that affects our life in a broad spectrum of different facets and manners, but this is just how we are. We're an innately tribal species, and race is a dimension through which these tribal little games we play, the way we associate with each other, these cliques, race is just one observable facet of that. Because even though we're living in a day and age where where race mixing is more common than it's ever been, mainly due to social engineering and due to propinquity, because in recent decades, we've been having a lot of mass immigration from many different countries all over the world, and they've been living in neighborhoods side by side with us, whereas previously that wasn't the case. And in spite of the fact that race mixing is being increasingly depicted as common, even desirable, and not just in our ads, but our TV dramas and so on, and they've got this weird obsession with putting mixed race people in basically every single character role that we come up with. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Moneypenny from James Bond, she's also she's a mixed race woman now. I think she has been for the past few Bond movies. There's so many other examples of this. They put a mixed race woman in this what is supposed to be an historical period drama called Bridgerton. And well, discussion as to why that is frankly another matter. But the point I'm trying to make, though, is race mixing is not as common as our state media would have us believe. And I would hesitate to say that it's unnatural, because, you know, we're all biological apes deep down. There are lots of beautiful, attractive women of different races, and there's lots of good-looking men of different races, you know, and you know, human nature being what it is, this is not unknown or not unheard of, but you had to consider the social implications and the psychological implications that it can lead to. And there's a plethora of literature that's been written about people who grow up in mixed-race childhoods, and the evidence is, well, the prognosis is not so good. I mean, first of all, there's higher rates of alcoholism, especially in mothers for mixed-race families. There's higher rates of divorce, there's higher rates of domestic abuse, and mental health is also poorer. These are all because, you know, individually we could examine these on a case-by-case basis, but I think deep down there's a very simple and straightforward reason as to why mixed-race couples tend to be more dysfunctional than couples that are more similar to each other, and it's very simple. It's because you're from two different tribes, you're from two different peoples, and the child can't decide which lineage it belongs to. And as people, we all like to think that our story, our genetic tapestry, as it were, we all like to keep things simple. We like to say, I belong to this tribe and not that one. You know, whenever we're presented with a box, with a survey, for instance, we all like to be able to tick one box. But some people have to tick more than one. And I'm quite lucky in this regard, because I'm pretty much monolineal or monoracial. As far as I'm aware, all my ancestors are from the British Isles. My grandfather my great grandfather on my mother's side was from Ireland. But do I consider myself part Irish? Of course not. I've literally only visited the place once. I don't speak any Gaelic Irish. I'm not a Catholic, and I don't have speckled skin and ginger hair either. I mean, spiritually, I believe the Irish, English, Welsh, and Scots are all one people, you know, British. But where do I consider to be my homeland? England. I consider myself culturally, genetically English. That is my home. But what do you do if you're not one of those people? What do you do if you're not monolineal? What do you do if your genetic ancestry test comes back with the results of well, sort of like a big mishmash, a hodgepodge of different peoples and different races? Well, that's where we get into the second part of my question. What are my thoughts on people who are mixed race? So first of all, with regards to the guy who asked this question, Harvomail, first of all, I refuse to believe, you are certainly not the only one who is part Native American and part European. Because I know a little bit about American history, and obviously, when the European settlers first colonized the geographic landmass that we call North America, I think this would have been in the 1600s and the next coming centuries later. Obviously, there would have been contact between the Europeans and the Native Americans who lived there, and as time went on, some of those Native Americans, they had their children confiscated and sent to Christian boarding schools so they could be assimilated into the ascendant Protestant American culture. So it was inevitable at some point that there would have been mixed race families of mixed lineage. But how do you come to terms with that? What do you do if on, say, your maternal side or your paternal side, somewhere along the line, you're part Native American? Well, that's, I don't quite know if I'm necessarily the right person to answer that. One thing, though, I will say is this is something that you as an individual have zero control over. See, if you're overweight, you can choose to exercise more and lose weight. If you have a drinking problem, you can choose to drink less. If you smoke, you can try the best you can to stop smoking. But what can you do if you're mixed race? Well, you can't do anything about that, because these are all things that were decided long before you were born. So wishing that you belong to one tribe or another, I'm afraid you don't have the power to rewrite your genetic history. All that's left, the only thing that you can do is you have to come to terms in your own way with what you are. In the same way, I was born with autism. I was born on the spectrum. And I hate that. I hate the fact that there's so many friendships that I passed out on throughout the years because I've either missed out on a social cue here or there, I said something that I shouldn't, or I didn't say something that I should have, and all the women who would otherwise have found me attractive and charming and have in some way been repulsed by me and my eccentricities, which I've never found out about because I'm just not that emotionally literate. I'm not that good at understanding body signals, even after decades of training. And the fact that I struggle to sleep properly at night. Now, these are all things that I can't do anything about. But I have to come to terms in my own way with the fact that I have an invisible disability. And I wish I didn't have it, but it's there. It's not going away anytime soon, and it's just down to me to accept it. And in much the same way, I have to live with my curse, as it were. In some way, Harvomail, you have to come to terms with your mixed lineage. You have to look at yourself in the mirror and think, am I European? Do I belong to, I don't know which tribe exactly, Blackfoot, Cree, or the Okanagan, Colville, or reservation, or whatever like that. But be honest and think about yourself. So if you hang around with other Americans, how do they see you? Do they see you as belonging to a member of a tribe? Do you have an active tribal membership? Are you receiving, for instance, do you have somewhere in your ID that states you belong to this reservation or that? Funnily enough, that reminds me, there was an American politician, I think her name was Elizabeth Warren, who once, she got into trouble because she basically lied. She pretended that she was part Native American when she wasn't. And also, there's a rise of university students or college students who were lying about their ancestry because they were white, but they were pretending that they were part Native American because they wanted to get benefits that otherwise would not have been afforded to them if they were monoracial. So, well, I don't know what you make out of this, Harvomail, but I would say that being mixed race, it's quite fashionable in this day and age to be mixed race, although I don't know. There are certain things I understand. There are certain perks and open doors to people who have genetic similarities to yours, and I beg you, there's lots of bored white women probably who've read too many books thinking, oh, why can't I be part Native American? And you can take pride in knowing, well, I have that. I have what these people want, but do you guys know the full story? Do you guys understand the sense of alienation, the sense of deracination that I feel, of wishing that I belong to this tribe or not, but I don't. Anyway, joking aside, in sense of serious, well, I would ask, when you look at yourself in the mirror, do you see yourself as European or Native American? Because based on how you described yourself in your comments, Harvomail, you say that you have pale skin, you're 6 feet tall, you physically pass for European. If other people see you as European, and the only clue pretty much as to your Native American ancestry is through a DNA test or through extended family connections you have, then, well, why not pass yourself off as European? Because you may very well be the only person who thinks about yourself in this way. Because race is an observable fact of life, there's no doubt about that. But the more generations pass, you know, the more your genetic history changes, it becomes a little more complicated than that. And you know, if you consider things on an evolutionary timescale, you've got to understand that we humans are a mixed species. I think statistically speaking, something like 4 or 5% of all racially European people have all racially European Caucasoids have something like 4 or 5% Neanderthal DNA. Now, the Neanderthals are a different species of hominid. And a lot of people tend to think that it was as soon as we arrived in Europe, we outcompeted and wiped them out. But that's not actually what happened. The reality is, when Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, they lived side by side with the Neanderthals and even mixed and even had children with them. And this is basically how modern European humans were born. I think this is the story behind the Cro-Magnon man. And not every race is part Neanderthal. It's something unique to Europeans. But if you consider humanity in a macro what was the term? From an evolutionary perspective, we are a mixed species, and race mixing, while in a social sense it presents problems, in the long run it's every bit as natural as the origin of our own species. So it's not necessarily a crime, it's not against the laws of nature, but a lot of it does boil down to how you perceive yourself, how you choose to identify yourself, and what your friends and your peers think about you. So these are all questions that really only you yourself can answer. And as I've said very, very early on, of course I don't see you as less of a person. I don't even know what you look like. There's so many people who I think less of, but I don't necessarily think less of this person or that person because they belong to a certain racial category or certain ethnicity or anything like that. Something to think about. Anyway, I hope I've been able to respond to your question in a concise and appropriate manner, Harvomail. And however you come to terms with your identity, I hope that you'll forgive yourself for not being perfect. I hope that you'll accept yourself and take pride in who and what you are, because you are the only person of your kind with your history and life experiences. You're unique, and nothing else can take that away from you, so you might as well come to embrace it. Anyway, I gotta run on with my collection now. This has been Tracking, and I'll see you guys in the next video.